Welcome to Reddit Revenge Stories. Did you know over 90% of people watch these videos but don't subscribe? If you enjoy stories of justice and payback, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to like the video if you're ready for today's story. Let's get to the story. I never thought I would be the kind of woman to betray my vows. I grew up believing in loyalty, in love, in building a life with one person and growing old with them. I always thought marriage was a promise you kept no matter what, until I found myself slowly drowning in silence inside my own home, and no one seemed to notice, especially not my husband. When I first met Armand, I was 23 and full of dreams. He had a quiet charm, an air of certainty that made me feel like I could build my world around him. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but he had a presence, steady, composed, responsible. We dated for 2 years and everything seemed right. No red flags, no big fights. It felt safe, and I thought that was love. We got married in a simple ceremony with just family and close friends. I was nervous but hopeful. In the early days of our marriage, things were good. Armand was focused on his career, and I supported him in every way. I was working too, but I made sure dinner was ready, the house was clean, his clothes were ironed. I wanted to be a good wife. I believed that if I gave my best, we'd build something beautiful together. But things started changing, slowly, almost invisibly at first. It began with small things. Armand coming home later than usual without letting me know. Long silences at dinner. No more random flowers, no more weekend plans. I'd ask how his day was, and he'd shrug, half listening, eyes glued to his phone. I started to feel invisible in my own house. I tried to fix it. I'd dress up more, cook his favorite meals, plan little surprises. But his response was always lukewarm, like he was just tolerating my efforts. There was no warmth in his eyes anymore. I asked him several times if something was wrong. He said no, he was just tired. Work was stressful. He needed space. And I believed him because I wanted to. Months went by and I felt myself slowly disappearing. I stopped trying to impress him. I stopped planning anything. I buried myself in work, in friends, in anything that would make the emptiness at home feel less suffocating. But nothing worked. Then, one afternoon, I met someone. His name was Sohail. He was a photographer working on a campaign with the firm I worked for. I was assigned as the point of contact, which meant we had to spend a lot of time together. Meetings, location visits, shoots. He was the opposite of Armin. Expressive, curious, always listening. When I spoke, he actually looked at me like he wanted to hear more. At first, I didn't think much of it. I told myself I was just enjoying some harmless conversation. But it didn't stay that way. Sohail noticed things others didn't. When I laughed but wasn't really happy. When I acted like I had it all together but was falling apart inside. And one day, after a long shoot, we sat in his car, eating street food in the rain. I remember it clearly. I told him everything. Not just about Armin, but about how lonely I felt, how unloved, how invisible. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened. And I cried. Not out of sadness, but because someone finally saw me. That moment should have been my wake-up call, but it wasn't. Instead, it became the beginning of a connection I wasn't strong enough to resist. We didn't jump into anything physical. It wasn't even about that. It was emotional. Late-night messages, coffee breaks, laughing over things that made me feel alive again. For the first time in years, I felt seen, heard, understood. I knew it was dangerous. I knew where it could lead. But I was so starved for affection, for kindness, that I clung to it. I tried to distance myself multiple times. I even deleted his number once. But every time Armand ignored me, every time he turned away from me in bed or brushed me off like I was a chore, Sohail's kindness echoed in my mind like a siren pulling me back. One evening I stayed late at work. It was raining again. Everyone else had left. Sohail showed up with 2 cups of chai. We sat in the conference room, lights low, windows fogged. I told him I was afraid, that I didn't want to be a cheater, that I hated myself for even thinking about him the way I did. He looked at me and said, You're not the one who left. He did. You just stayed behind and waited. That night, I didn't sleep. I knew I was walking a dangerous path. I hadn't crossed any lines yet, but I was close. So close. And Armand didn't even notice. Or maybe he did, and he didn't care. I started journaling. I wrote down everything I felt: rage, guilt, sadness. I tried to remind myself who I was before all of this: a woman with values, with self respect. I asked myself over and over, how did I get here? And the answer was always the same: I was neglected. One Saturday morning, I decided to confront Armin. I made breakfast. He sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, as always. I said, "Do you love me?" He looked up, confused. What? It's a simple question. Do you love me? He frowned. Why are you asking this now? Because I need to know if I still matter to you. Because I've been living in this house like a ghost. And I need to know if it's just me who feels that way. He sighed. You're overthinking. You always do this. Everything's fine. Fine isn't enough, I said quietly. I'm not fine. He didn't say anything. He just got up and left the table. That was the moment I realized I was already alone. I didn't rush to Sohail. I didn't confess or throw myself into his arms. I spent the next few weeks thinking deeply about everything, about who I wanted to be, whether I still wanted this marriage, whether I still respected myself. And then something happened. Something that shifted everything. I found a receipt in Armand's jacket from a luxury restaurant, a dinner for two. The date was one of the nights he said he was working late. At first, I wanted to believe it was work-related, but my gut told me otherwise. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I waited. I started watching closely. His behavior, his texts, his lies. I stopped doubting myself and started connecting the dots. And then I found it. Messages. On his old tablet, synced unknowingly, with a woman named Nayla. They were sweet, flirty, familiar, like us once. Photos, jokes, pet names. My heart didn't break. It froze. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling both vindicated and destroyed. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't needy. I was abandoned. Long before I ever met Sohail. It changed everything. That was the night I decided this story wasn't going to end with me being the villain. I wasn't going to be the broken wife crying over betrayal. I was going to be the storm that reminded Armand exactly who he underestimated. After reading those messages, something inside me shifted. I had been blaming myself for years, for not being exciting enough, for not being enough. But that night, I realized the truth. Armand had stopped choosing me long ago. I was just the one still holding on, still showing up, still hoping. But not anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat quietly for hours, just planning. Because if there was one thing I still had, it was my dignity. And I wasn't going to let him steal the rest of it. The next morning, I acted normal. I made tea, I smiled, I kissed him on the cheek. I watched as he got dressed and left for work, knowing full well he was lying to my face. And I didn't say a word. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next few weeks preparing. I backed up everything: his texts, the photos, the receipts. I went through bank statements and found purchases I hadn't made, hotels I hadn't visited, jewelry I hadn't received. I even found proof he'd used our joint savings to buy Nayla a designer handbag. That was the final insult. But I wasn't going to confront him with anger. I wanted precision. I wanted the kind of revenge that didn't need screaming. The kind that left scars where pride once lived. I started with the house. We had bought it together 5 years ago, but it was under both our names. I consulted a lawyer, quietly, privately, and began the paperwork to separate our assets. I made sure everything was legal, neat, airtight. Armin had no idea. He was too busy sneaking around with Nyla to notice I was building my exit behind his back. Then I focused on my career. I'd been holding back for years, working part-time to manage our home while he chased promotions. But now I went full-time, accepted a higher position, and started putting away every rupee I could. I even opened a new account he didn't know about. Every deposit was a step away from him. And then, Sohail. We hadn't spoken much since that night in the office. I had pulled away after realizing how vulnerable I had become. But now I needed to close that chapter too. Not for him, for me. I met him at a quiet cafe on a Wednesday afternoon. He smiled when he saw me, like no time had passed. But I had changed. I wanted to thank you, I said. He looked surprised. For what? For reminding me who I am. For being there when I needed someone to see me. You sound like you're saying goodbye, he said softly. I am. He looked down, and for a moment I saw the disappointment in his eyes, but I also saw respect. You deserve to be happy, Mare. I hope you find that, however you choose to. I smiled, stood up, and walked away without looking back. It was the closure I needed. The final piece was the confrontation. I waited until everything was ready, my job, my finances, my legal position. I had built a fortress out of my pain, and now I was ready to let it burn. It was a Sunday evening. He was on the couch, scrolling his phone as usual. I sat across from him and said, "We need to talk." He barely looked up. Now. Yes, now. He sighed. What is it? I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Inside were printouts, messages, screenshots, receipts, documents. His entire betrayal, documented. He stared at it, then looked at me, pale. What is this? You tell me. He opened a page, then another, flipping faster, panic creeping across his face. This isn't what it looks like, he stammered. I laughed. Isn't it? Because it looks exactly like my husband cheating on me for over a year. He stood up. Maher, wait. No, you don't get to control the conversation anymore. He froze. I could see the shock in his eyes. I had never spoken to him like that, but I wasn't the woman he married anymore. She was gone. I'm leaving you, Armin, but not today. Not loudly, not with drama. I'm leaving you with silence, with dignity, the same way you left me every day in this house without saying a word. He sat down slowly, defeated. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The house will be sold. You'll get your share. I've already moved my money. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to inform you. His mouth opened, then closed again. I continued. And Nayla? Keep her. I'm sure she thinks she won some grand prize. Let her have the version of you I wasted years on. Just remember, you didn't lose me because of her. You lost me because of you. He didn't argue. He couldn't. There was nothing left to say. That night, I slept in the guest room. I locked the door not out of fear, but out of peace. I felt lighter than I had in years. Over the next few weeks, we barely spoke. I found an apartment and moved out. He didn't stop me, he just watched. I think that was my final revenge, not the confrontation, not the evidence, but the silence. The calm. The fact that I walked away not as a broken woman, but as someone who had reclaimed herself. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, staying so long, giving him so much, almost falling for someone else. I don't, because every part of that journey brought me back to myself. And in the end, that's the only thing that mattered. Starting over wasn't easy. When you've been defined by someone else's presence for so long, solitude feels like a storm at first. The quiet is loud. The stillness is uncomfortable. And the questions, they come rushing in. Did I do enough? Was it all my fault? Could I have saved it? But the truth is, some things aren't meant to be saved. Some things are meant to be buried, respectfully, so you can begin again. I moved into a small apartment in a quieter part of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The first night I slept there alone, I stared at the ceiling for hours, hearing every creak, every tick of the clock. And then, just before sunrise, I cried. Not for Armin, not for the marriage, but for the years I gave to someone who never truly saw me. I grieved the version of myself I had abandoned. The woman who used to laugh loudly, dance in the kitchen, dream big. I promised her I'd never let her disappear again. Work became my sanctuary. I poured myself into it with a kind of determination I didn't know I had. For the first time, I wasn't balancing my ambition with someone else's ego. I could be bold, assertive, driven, without feeling guilty. And it paid off. Within 6 months, I got promoted again. My ideas were being recognized. My voice mattered. I started going to therapy too. I needed to unpack everything. The resentment, the guilt, the emotional scars I had buried so deep, they felt like part of my bones. My therapist, a gentle woman named Aisha, helped me untangle years of silent pain. She reminded me that forgiveness isn't always about the other person. Sometimes it's about setting yourself free. And little by little, I began to live again. I picked up old hobbies, painting, reading fiction, taking long walks without a destination. I even traveled alone once, something I never thought I'd do. I sat by the beach in Sri Lanka watching the sun rise over the ocean and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Of course, Armin tried to reach out. It started small, a forwarded message, a birthday wish, then a long email about how he missed me, how he made mistakes, how he realized what he had lost. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because some doors, once closed, need to stay that way. He even asked to meet once, said he just wanted closure. But I already had mine. I had walked through fire and I had come out the other side. I didn't need to reopen old wounds just to prove they had healed. As for Nyla, I heard through mutual acquaintances that it didn't last. No surprise there. Affairs built on deception don't survive the weight of real life. The glamour fades. Reality doesn't. It was strange, though. For a long time, I had imagined revenge as something loud, slamming doors, exposing secrets, shouting matches. But now I realized that the most powerful revenge is indifference. Living well, moving on, becoming untouchable. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. One evening I found myself at a bookstore thumbing through the pages of a poetry collection. A young woman beside me asked if I'd recommend anything. She looked about 25, bright eyes, hopeful energy, the kind I used to have. We got to talking. She said she was engaged, excited but nervous. I smiled and said, "Just make sure you're loved the way you deserve. And don't ignore your own silence. It always knows." She looked at me curiously, like she wanted to ask more, but I just wished her well and walked away. That's when I knew I had healed. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without pain. About being able to tell your story without trembling. About standing in the ruins and realizing you were the architect of your own rebirth. I don't regret the marriage. I don't regret the pain. Because it taught me what I will never accept again. It taught me that love isn't something you chase. It's something that meets you where you are and helps you rise, not vanish. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who survived betrayal. Not with vengeance, but with strength. Not by becoming cold, but by choosing herself. And that's the most powerful thing I've ever done. So if you're listening to this, and you're in a place where you feel unseen, unloved, forgotten, I want you to know you're not alone, you're not weak, and it's never too late to choose yourself. Because sometimes the greatest love stories is the one you write alone.